Can you join this? For now, so we can keep talking. Great. Well, then I'll just go ahead and record myself and the screen share on this side, and then you guys can ask me any questions on this side, but no one will be able to hear them. So we can figure out how people can join later. That's a great idea. Okay, so I have prepared the first thing that I did is I looked at the debts. So I wanted to get an understanding for what it would take to pay off the debt. So I will share my screen on the recording. Okay. So I'll zoom in just a little. Does that help? Okay. So we were looking at somebody, an anonymous person with this debt profile. And this is sorted in order of highest to lowest. And there was a couple of things that I noticed about the minimum payments here versus the interest rate and the total amount, which I will walk you through in just a little bit. So I have some questions about each one of these. The first one I put in was the Discover credit card. And you can see over here that we're looking at $17K, 26%, and a $390 minimum payment. So what I found was interesting about this is that it is only $390 is exactly the interest payment. So if somebody made that minimum payment, they would just be paying the interest in perpetuity. It would never go up and it would never go down. So you can see here that I put in the $390, and that's exactly equal to the interest. The amount paid towards the principal never goes above zero, and the amount just slowly increases over time because this is slightly less than the interest amount. Now, for example, if you change that to $391, it would slightly go down over time. You would have a fraction of a dollar starting to pay towards the interest payment, and this would start to move in the other direction. So the difference of $1 makes a huge difference. It would be the difference between going from paying it in perpetuity. So you see if I change this to 0, time to pay off is never, versus if I add $1, it will take 23 years. Now, this is not the same as a bank's math. Each credit card, I believe, has their own way to calculate interest. And in fact, it's required for credit cards to show the duration of payments if you continue to pay the minimum payment. That there's a section on the bill that breaks that down, which sometimes is different from this this educational calculator. Any questions here? Great. So the next one is the Citibank card, and that's a $54 minimum payment, and I found it very interesting that it would appear this is less than interest at 27%. So if we go down and look at this, the breakdown of how this payment is applied over time, interest is $103.39 for this balance based on this interest rate. So I'm very confused as to why 54 is the rate that the card is suggesting as the minimum payment. Great. Good to know. So Macy's was the next one that we were looking at, and Macy's is a very small balance, very high interest, but a very low minimum payment. And let's see what we're looking at. So interest is much less than the minimum payment, and so you will pay off this bill with just making minimum payments in 1.3 years. So no biggie. That seems okay. We can definitely do that. Moving on to Chase. Chase had 1.8. Oh, by the way, I put PayPal and Citibank credit cards under the same Citibank tab because it's essentially the same profile. So the logic for the 54 is the same as the logic for the 55, and the balances are almost equivalent. So I just created one tab for that. Chase is 1.8, and at a 26% essentially interest rate, there's a $56 minimum payment, which is interest plus what looks to be 0.8% of the principal. So looking at that, if we scroll down here and expand out, you would be making a $15 principal payment, $40 interest payment, and those interest payments would go down over time, assuming that no additional charges are added to the card. So, yeah, yep. Yeah, exactly. I believe it's actually compounds daily. So I have a compound daily function that that is calculating that interest. But if you wanted to, you could do a monthly. The reality is oh, sorry. The question that was asked is, how is the interest calculated? Is it on a monthly basis? Is it compounding daily? My understanding is that it's compounding daily for credit cards, and that's the formula that I've included here. But the reality is we don't know what each bank is using for their math, and that would be a question for the bank. And my guess is that they would give you a runaround, and or they wouldn't know. The person who answers the phone might not have that answer, and they would send you to a bunch of help resources or something. So in conclusion, from all of these debts, what I found is that, as a summary, let me just zoom out a tiny bit. Here are each of the balances. Here are each of the interest rates and the credit limits and the credit utilization. So this credit utilization being above 30% is impacting this person's credit score. And their current monthly payments would make it so that they never pay off 3 out of the 5 credit card debts. But with a very, very small adjustment, they could get out of credit card debt in 5 years. Yeah. Well, if they paid these values. I can send you this file. Yeah. Yes. So that's the credit cards. What I also wanted to explore is what would happen if you got a new personal loan so that you could get rid of those credit card, that high utilization rate, and probably cut up a couple of these cards to not be tempted to use them. For example, the $18,000 credit limit, don't close that, because having a high credit limit and not using it is really good for your credit. But probably cut that card up and not be tempted to use it again, because it's clear that going up to a credit limit has stopped them from spending more on another card. So if you simply eliminate this high credit limit card and stay within an amount that can be paid back every month, then that could be really good. And then the other thing I was considering is about the personal loan. So the total amount of debt, I'll zoom in just a little bit. So the total amount of debt for credit cards is, you can't see it, there it is, $28,000. So let's say we get a personal loan for exactly that amount, which you might want to get a little bit more. You might want to get exactly, depending on the person's situation. And I was trying to get as close to the current monthly minimum payment. So the current monthly minimum payment is a total of $585. And if they got a personal loan for 5 years, they would increase their monthly payment by just slightly, $663, but it would be far below the $900 that it would take for them to reach that goal. Oops. The $900 that it would take to reach that goal if they didn't get a personal loan. But the good news is, whether you get a personal loan or whether you don't get a personal loan, you can be out of debt in 5 years, out of credit card debt. Just one has a $900 monthly payment and the other has a $680, I think, monthly payment, $660. Any questions there? Yeah. So the adjustments are this minus this. So these two require no adjustment. That's the Chase and the Macy. And then these two up here, which are paying less than, Citibank and PayPal are paying less than the interest, would require an increase of about $83. And then the Discover, an increase of $145. And $145 is the difference between, this is the one that has $390. Yeah, this is a difference of between never paying it off or 23 years if you added $1, which is so wild. Well, so it depends on if you're doing the snowball method or the, what is it called? Snowball versus avalanche. There's something to be said about paying off your smaller debts first to have that satisfaction of progress. Mathematically, it makes sense to pay off the big one first, but I really think getting Macy's and Chase out of the way could be really good. So that's all about the credit cards. And if they qualify for a personal loan, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I'm going to mute you until you ask a question. So if someone qualifies for a personal loan, perhaps even the interest rate could be lower. So you could put in 12% here, and that lowers that payment just a little bit more. 7%, $578. But if it's 14%, it starts getting pretty close to this new credit card payment plan. So if it's like a 15%, still a little bit of a savings, but there's also oftentimes an origination fee, an account opening fee. So if it's kind of the same, it might not pay to get a personal loan at all, because the difference is so small. Over the lifetime of your loan, you would be paying, if you got a personal loan for these, you would be paying $12,000. And I have not calculated how much the total interest you'll be paying on the credit card side, which you would just have to do this. So this is the wrong amount. Let's put it back to the newer amount. So this is $535. Okay, so the credit card interest on the Discover card by itself for 5 years is $14,000 according to this calculator. Not necessarily the exact amount that is going to be the real life scenario, but $14,000 just on one card alone. And the personal loan would be the personal loan, even at a 15% interest rate, is estimated to be only $12,000. So it definitely makes, if there's if the origination fee is less than like $2,000 or $3,000, it's looking like the right financial decision. But also we're talking about over the course of 5 years, some pretty smaller numbers, relatively speaking. So then looking at the personal loan, I wanted to look at what would happen if I added $100 and how much that would save to pay it down faster or leave it where it is. And I found that it's only $400 in total interest, and it would shorten the term by less than a year. So the personal loan is probably fine to continue at the payment plan that you have. Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yes, sorry. That's everything for the credit card piece. So now moving into the Lending Club personal loan, which is $9,000. I wanted to see what adding an extra $100 would do. So if I set this to 0, it will be paid off September, December, somewhere around there in about 2 years. And the total interest that will be paid is $2,000. And then if you add $100, the savings aren't that great. It's $400 savings. Any questions there? Okay. So then on this one, it's so close to the end. This is the Lexus, which was originally a $13,000 loan. I think it started in 2020 because of the monthly payment. You said that it started, I think, in 2021. But if it's ending in 2024, I think that it was a 4-year loan starting in 2020. And If that's true, we're getting towards the very, very end. And if you added any additional payments, so say you add $100, you save $2. Like, just let that one run its course exactly at the same rate that it's running. Any questions there? Awesome. Okay. So that's just a look at the debt payoff strategy and looking at all of the debts. And then I wanted to run some numbers to understand how this might play out in a variety of different scenarios. So I'll zoom in just a little bit. Okay. So let's imagine that some person has 5,700 monthly net income and about 5,700 costs, and they don't change anything about their finances. They keep those two things the same. So $68,400 is 5,700 times 12. So this is their annual net income. And let's say that they don't pay off their debt. They keep making minimum payments, and they eventually pay off their personal loan, and they eventually pay off the auto loan pretty soon. But the credit cards don't get paid off because the minimum payment is actually less than the interest. And the principal, the balance of the card goes up, keeps going up. And so then the credit card minimum payment starts going up. So let's say this person is 35 years old, hypothetically. I'm going to zoom in. I think it's still too small. So let's say this person is 35 years old. And in 5 years, let's say nothing happens. We just keep making minimum payments, keep just a tiny balance on the cards. And then at 40, the credit card minimum payment goes up by $150. That's it per month. We went from having enough savings to last a lifetime, but you have to work until you're 97. If you work until you're 97, your savings will never run out in the current statement. Like, let's imagine no emergency happens. Your annual expenses, go ahead. Savings comes from spending 67,000 and making 68,000. So you get to put in about 1,500 per month. Yep, starting with $1. And it works. Like, if you have no emergencies, you start collecting Social Security. I can't remember if it's at 65 or at a different age, but approximately about that time you collect Social Security. And I also don't know how much your Social Security should be. I think it's 60%, but I could be totally wrong on that one. So we can adjust those numbers. But in this hypothetical situation, this person does have to work until 96, and their savings will not run out. Their cost of living does not exceed their savings. But if the credit card minimum payment starts going up at 40, you run out of your savings at 56. Assuming that your net income does not go up faster than 3.2%. So your net income is increasing by 3%. Your annual expenses are increasing by 3%. You throw this $150 monthly expense out of the blue, and it breaks everything. You can't get back on track. Then at 45, let's say it goes up by another $200, and then at 55, it happens again. You can't you're living so close to the edge that it's just not safe. So this is what's at stake if no payment plan is made and the debts just live on. Let's move on to a new scenario. So in this scenario, we're going to model what might happen if someone paid off their debts, but instead of increasing savings, they simply kept spending at the same rate, putting all of the money that they were putting toward debt to new expenses. Disclaimer, future finances are not predictable, and this is way oversimplified with potentially calculation errors, et cetera, et cetera. But let's say that the Lexus is paid off, but they spend instead of save, which means that this $288 disappears. It doesn't become a positive amount towards savings goals, but it also is no longer a negative amount. It just, you stop spending this amount, but it goes somewhere else. That means that you can't increase saving to your 401k and you can't increase your spending. You just get this amount and that's it. You have to work to 75 and your savings will last you until about 100. So the only thing that I changed here is that instead of adding the monthly increase in the debt payments, I've basically wiped it all completely. So those are just demonstration numbers. Basically, there is no more debt after 5 years, and the delta between income and expenses does not get bigger. So I wanted to see what would happen if this person, so they have paid off their debts, but they've also increased their cost of living at the same rate. And then they decide to buy a house. What age could they buy a house? How long would they have to work? How much of a house could they buy? So in this scenario, this person just rents for the rest of their life. And they rent $2,200 based on this initial budget. They rent $2,200. And that just keeps increasing with inflation. So maybe it increases by 3%. In this scenario, that's what I'm modeling, but in real life, it might be less, it might be more. But in this scenario, we're just modeling that all expenses increase with a 3.2% inflation. And net income also increases at exactly that same rate. Again, this is just for example. So this, yeah. Those are arbitrary interest returns on investments. Mm-hmm. Exactly. The 5% is for investments and the 4% is for retirement. The $1 is because if I put 0, it breaks. So I have to put something so it doesn't break. But this is modeling $0. $0 getting added. And this person rents for the rest of their life. And they did earn enough in their savings to buy a house, but they just chose to keep renting. I wanted to see what that would look like. And they retire at 75 and their savings runs out at $100, assuming completely linear type behaviors. Which is obviously not going to be the case. Looking at this with a purchase of a home that replaces the rent. So I was trying to find something that was the equivalent of their $2,200 rent payment. And a $30,000 down payment at 57 is the equivalent of a $60,000 down payment at that time. Meaning $2,000, $2,200, probably going to be closer to $3,200 if this person is 35. Does that make sense? Okay. And that's the equivalent of their rent at that time. And they don't have any additional monthly expenses. Their mortgage is exactly the same cost as their rent. And they pay off their mortgage in 30 years. And so they'll get this additional $3,300 per month that hits at 87. And this allows them to extend only 2 years, interestingly enough. So whether you rent the whole time, assuming your rent is controlled and increases at that rate, or whether you buy, it's kind of the same. Even selling the home, adjusted for inflation, a $300,000 home would be $1.6 million. So this is all in the event that somebody pays off their debt but doesn't start saving more aggressively. So what happens when somebody pays off their debt and saves more aggressively? So after they pay off the Lexus and the personal loan, they start contributing $500 per month to a 401k. And then after they pay off the credit card debt of $900 a month in 5 years, they start investing $1,000 a month into the 401k. And then they get to purchase a home at 42 instead of 57. So they've saved up more. No, the down payment is coming from the savings of, you have to assume that there's at least $1,500 and that they didn't increase. So you see that there's a drop in their annual expenses after they pay down these loans. That drop allows them to start saving more aggressively. Mm-hmm. The question was, the money that's in the investments column is not the same as the 401k, and that's correct. The 401k contribution is different from the annual expenses. But to your point, if we're assuming that the amount that was going towards the debt goes directly towards a 401k, technically, the annual expense doesn't go down. I'll have to look at this one more time, because I think that it could be the case that none of these are needed. So we go back to a pretty conservative growth in investments. That does impact pretty significantly. Got it. Okay, so 42 might be too young. So let's say we keep it at, they buy the house at 57. Okay, so I'm waiting until, the reason I chose that amount, that age, is I'm waiting until savings gets above 30K before making the purchase. So 57 could work. Retire at 78. Unforeseen illness, 20K at, let's say, 73. Great. So what I just did now is I eliminated the transfer of the debt to the 401k, because I actually think that if I'm looking at the budget, what I would do is I would keep probably the same total amount, but then this would go to 401k instead of auto. And this would go to 401k. So it would actually be the same total expense. It would just be directed somewhere else. Great. Which is what we have here. This should be 12,000. Oh no, it'll start at 18,000. So for the first couple of years, they start contributing 6,000, and then after that, it becomes 18,000 to the 401k if they have an employer, or to a Roth IRA. 18,000 would obviously be too high if it's a Roth, so these numbers might need to be adjusted. But so this unforeseen expense does seem to be messing things up. So if at 65, if at 73, there's an unforeseen expense of 20K adjusted for inflation, that would set them back pretty far. So maybe that's too high. Yeah, I would highly encourage the emergency fund comes first, and that I think that it's really important that expenses are decreased. So imagine in this scenario, if you lower your budget at 36, this person is 35. It changes your savings lasting by 10 years. $150 a month. Invested or earning some sort of interest. Yeah. And if we could get that to 300, their savings never runs out. Of course, this person, I have them working until 97. So we would definitely want to look at, depending on what scenario this person wants to do, we would want to tweak all of the numbers accordingly. Like when they're planning to retire, how much they're planning to lower their budget by, how much they're planning to put into emergency fund. So you can see that there's so many different variables that you can start to play with, and making decisions now that create delayed gratification later is really important. So let's say we do decrease spending of $300 in this scenario. Says doesn't run out, retire at 75. So let's assume this person wants to retire younger than that. The way that I would adjust that is this column in I is the annual net income column. So I would move the 0 up higher and see how that impacts their savings. So they would still last until 105, so probably okay to cut a little more. 90, that's too far. That's pretty good. So work until 72, savings runs out at 105 just by reducing your spending by $300. Okay. Then in the final version, I wanted to see what would happen if this person, make this 1800. What would happen if this person makes more money and they also are able to increase their spending and retire earlier? In addition to, they pay off their debts, they start saving for retirement, they buy a home at 42, and they build an emergency fund. But the key difference is that they start to make more money and they can retire at 69 and their savings will last them their lifetime. So this is a difference. If you, a difference of about $20,000 in net. Any other questions here? Okay. There's a lot of numbers. But the main thing I wanted to call out was the planning for retirement and the impact of keeping debt versus paying it off, as well as the impact of making sure that you leverage the debt payments that you were making toward an investment saving strategy or retirement goal instead of spending more. Instead of saying, oh, well, I have an extra $300 a month. Now I get to buy extra food or extra spa packages or extra upgrade my car or whatever it is. That if you postpone that enjoyment and leverage that debt, leverage those debt payments for your future self, you can really impact your quality of life as you age.